Welcome, everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Today is March 15th. It is approximately 3:01 p.m. and this is a special meeting of the Board of Directors of the West Bay Municipal Water District. And if our staff could please determine if we have a quorum.
Absolutely. And we'll start with Director Deere. Here. Director Albrecht. Here. Director Williams.
Here.
Director Gray.
Here.
And President Houston.
Here. Great. All five of us are here. Item number 3 is public comment. Do we have anyone from the public wishing to speak?
I do not believe we have any comments here in the room, so I'll turn my attention to the online platform and ask if there's anyone who would like to make a public comment to acknowledge yourself by raising your hand on the platform. Currently, I see no hands raised. And so I will presume that we have no public comments at this time, President Houston.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Greg. And I am going to go ahead and we're going to take something out of order here. We have a closed session today that's scheduled. And so we're going to go into closed session first to get that business out of the way before we go into the budget workshop. So with that, it's item 7A, public employment, title, general counsel. So with that, we're going to move into closed session. Let's go. We're gonna- I don't, she's not back yet, is she? But we can.
I'm here.
There you are, Director Gray. Okay, great. All right. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting back to order. We are out of closed session and I'm going to report out. So West Basin Municipal Water District, the Board of Directors has decided to authorize an agreement for general counsel legal services with Best and Krieger, and our new general counsel will be Mr. Joseph Byrne. The vote was unanimous 5-0 of the board members to entertain the agreement or enter into this new agreement. The board also voted to terminate the agreement with Alshire and Winder, effective according to the contract. And that vote was for voting in favor, Directors Williams, Houston, Alvarez, and Deere, and Director Gray abstained. And so that is a result of our closed session. With that, we are ready to move forward with our next item, which is presentations. I don't think we have any presentations. Our action calendar, there's no action calendar, so we have an information calendar, item 6A, which is our fiscal year 2023-24 budget workshop number 1. So with that, we'll go ahead and please proceed.
Okay, thank you, President Houston, and all of our board members. And I have a few remarks that I want to start to open up our first budget workshop for fiscal year 23-24 for you and also for all of our guests who are online, which I would like to acknowledge Lou Vargas from the city of Manhattan Beach, who's here with us today. Craig Cadwallader from the Surfrider Foundation, who has always been a guest of ours in our meetings, as well as I believe Michael Geoghegan is also present with us, and maybe a few others who I may not recognize. But with that, I'm very pleased to say that the preparation for today's presentation has been a comprehensive effort by all of our departments under the leadership of our Executive Manager of Finance, Margaret Moja, and our Manager of Finance, Marianne Rexroad. Having a variety of policy decisions that you, our board, will make on behalf of our ratepayers and our broader constituents. Staff has prepared today's discussion in a way that will help provide a broad overview of the district's financial position and to talk with you about the principal drivers that may likely influence our position, and also discuss a few scenarios that can help inform the policies that you need to make in a way that helps you influence and achieve the outcomes that you hope to have for the district's financial position. We have extensive details in the exhibits that are provided to support more detailed discussions at your choosing. However, our intention is to provide a greater level of detail in our workshop number 2 on April 12th. As you know, our district is experiencing pronounced fluctuations in our revenues as well as our expenses, but this circumstance isn't unique to us. As water sales decrease, as operating costs increase, it becomes a delicate balance for us to set revenue requirements that ensure that we're able to cover our operating expenses, but while also helping us provide for the value-added services that so many of our communities have come to rely upon for West Basin. So with that, the four primary drivers that will help us influence our budget and our financial position starts off with our assumptions for water sales. And of course, we've had a strong response by the public to the call for conservation, the call for water use efficiency. And so those water sales assumptions will be a key component of how we set our revenue targets. In addition to that, the board's policy on rates and charges, debt coverage, and other primary financial metrics certainly will influence the outcome. And then our question of capital investment policy and the rising cost of operating expenses needs to be seriously considered. And then finally, the scope of our district programs that we're providing to the community and the resources such as staffing levels that are necessary to ensure that our program delivery is effective. So those are the four key areas that I think will primarily influence the outcome of our budget exercise and the financial position that we hope to achieve. But it's important to note that as I approach my 1-year anniversary here at West Basin, and truly it's been an honor and a privilege to serve you, the board, as all of our constituents in the district, it's been my observation that West Basin is incredibly well received and thought of throughout our service area. In speaking with one of our constituents, who I won't name, she indicated that she truly appreciates the meaningful engagement that she is seeing from West Basin as a water agency, which she had not observed for any other water agencies. And so I think there's a lot to be said about that value-added service. And so everything that we've done in the course of developing our water recycling programs, delivering our educational programs, and the significant progress that we've made in the area of water use efficiency and conservation really amounts to why the community appreciates West Basin and the organization that we are today. So with that, at a time when the public is appropriately concerned with water supply reliability, the leadership that you as board members have provided through your policy setting and the creation of these programs have resulted in a positive impact that has benefited the entire region. So with that, just closing here, as we think about the future direction of West Basin and we think about balancing the delicate nature of our water resources, this budget discussion is going to be very crucial and pivotal as we embark in the next 75 years of water supply reliability for the region. And so with that, I want to hand it over to my executive manager of finance, Ms. Margaret Moja. And we have the complement of all of our managers here to chime in from time to time where the board may have specific interest. So with that, Margaret, take it away.
Thank you so much. So if I ask you to turn to your presentation, it begins on page 5 of your packet. But really, I'd like to begin the next page, which is our mission statement. And our mission statement is to provide a safe and reliable supply of high quality waters to the communities we serve. And I think the opening remarks from our general manager talks about that. We are here to serve our community, and we do so in a variety of ways through recycling, through education, through our conservation efforts. And each of those efforts are helping ensure that we have a reliable water for our community. Let's turn to our attention to the next page, which is our workshop agenda. So we have a number of areas that we'd like to review with you. And as Greg has shared with you, this is intended to be a high overview of the intent there. That being said, as Greg mentioned, we do have additional details for you, both as supplemental slides, if you will, so we can turn to those slides if we choose to. But we also, as part of the packet, we also provided you even more detail as it relates to our program activity as well as our CIP efforts, if you will. So those are good reference points, and we will, again, want to engage with you and that level of detail in a future workshop. Today, we wanted just to give you sort of a depth and breadth, if you will, of where we are as we look to, as Greg said, we've enjoyed our first 75 years and where we will be heading into our next 75 years. With that, we again will look at the drivers, give you a headline of our financial summary, go into revenues and expenses, provide you a 5-year forecast. Again, these are very preliminary. This gives you just a sense of sort of what the decisions that we make today and the impact it could have into the future. We will give you some sensitivity analysis just to kind of give you a sense of, should we be too conservative or are we not being conservative enough? We can certainly address those items there. And then finally, sort of next steps, really focusing in on what the schedule looks like. And it's also, I know it's been of a great importance to make sure that our communities hear these workshops and what efforts we have done in that area. So with that, I'm happy now to turn over to our fifth section, which is our budget drivers. So if we go forward a few slides. And Greg has mentioned these in his opening remarks, and I wanted to spend a little time on this worksheet here just to focus in on the considerations that we see as staff and what we would like to hear from you as to how do we address some of these challenges that we see and what is the appropriate response to them. So first of all, under water sales, we look at water sales in a number of ways, and certainly there could be others, but we certainly looked at the investment in conservation as certainly one of those items that we have been, again, very successful with our programs. We've been able to really put something out there. I know there's been a great emphasis in the last year, for instance, on grass replacement and even grass replacement in the disadvantaged communities. We want to make sure that we understand where the board wants to continue to serve in that capacity with or without sort of grant funding opportunities, because again, those are areas of which, we have, some opportunities there to really make an impression, if you will, to continue to lessen our dependence on imported water. And so where are we on that? Water demand variability, certainly you'll see some numbers here. We shared some earlier today at the Finance and Administration Committee. We are seeing a response by our public as it relates to water sales. Water sales is one in which drives our budget, if you will. 90% of our revenues comes from water sales, both in the area of our recycling system as well as our potable water. And so making sure that we get the right number there is appropriate because we want to set rates to a realistic number that's there. And so we will talk about sort of that variability. Certainly, we've been also hampered, if you will, in sort of achieving our goals for this year, our budgeted sales, because of the rainfall that has happened. And rainfall in a very significant way has had some impact on us as well. And last, in our source water quality, this specifically speaks to our recycled water. You have heard us share over, finance and administration or engineering and operations committees that we are challenged sometimes by our water quality. We certainly have been feeling that most recently. And so that certainly could have an impact to us and how we respond and able to deliver that high quality water that we talked about in our mission statement to be able to give the water that our customers need and want to ensure that they have water reliability. So moving on to the next column, which is your rates and charges and other revenues. And as Greg had sort of identified our financial position. Financial position, we look at sort of our rate philosophy. Historically, the district has always passed through our rates and charges for Metropolitan Water District, and this budget assumes that continues on. But we also want to look at our own rates and charges, and I know that we are looking to do a cost of service, hopefully sometime in the near-term future. So certainly that could have some impact on how we approach our rates and charges on a go-forward basis. We also want to be mindful of our financial metrics. Our financial metrics help us guide us, if you will. We are certainly are guided by our discussion with rating agencies as what's important to them when we look at our rating that we have for the district here. And they look at cash reserves and also your debt coverage. And so we want to make sure that we understand where the board's tolerance is for that and to be able to maintain our credit rating. And then finally, understanding the 5-year forecast is also very important to us as well. That 5-year forecast gives us a sort of a glimpse into what the future could look like. Certainly, we won't really know until we get there because of the variability of around expenses, for instance, or even water sales. But certainly, if we have sort of a sense of where we're going, knowing the decisions we make today certainly could have an impact to us in the future. Of Grant opportunities, this makes some assumptions as to grants, but we all, as you always hear us say, we are seeking out those grants that will help us offset, if you will, some of that impact there. So today we have made some assumptions as to having some costs associated with a conservation program, for instance. We have a pending grant out there, so we've not assumed the revenues, for instance. And so that goes back to that investment in conservation. If it's important for you to invest in conservation, then we want to make sure that we've included it in the budget. And if we are successful in getting that grant, that only helps us with the bottom line. And so we are showing the grants that we know of, and that is important for you to understand that distinction. Because again, we will make every effort to get grants in here or other external funding to make sure that we can keep that low price or that reduce the impact of a water rate increase, if you will. And then finally, with our contracted recycled water rates, we do have a number of agreements with our customers, our large scale customers. Many of those are sort of under negotiation right now. And so we want to make sure we have a full understanding of what that impact is, not only today, but into the future as well. So we can make sure that they are paying for what an appropriate cost is for them for that recycled water. Moving on to the third column there, you see there the capital investment and operational expenditures. Again, we here are to make sure that we're meeting that high quality water to our communities. And so we do so, and we have agreements in place, but we also have our recycled water customers that are, our parks and medians, if you will, that are done at the various cities. And so we want to make sure that we're able to provide them the water that's, reliable and that has a good water quality associated with that. And so we want to make sure that we understand how we're able to meet those needs, if you will, as we are continuing to look to, which is the second bullet there and under that column, future direction of West Basin's recycling water program. We know that we are having a discussion here at a staff level, very productive discussions with our regional partners to understand how we can work with them into the future and understand how we can sort of evolve our system. Again, the system we've had is 25 years old. It was the one of a kind when it started. As we have grown into those years, if you will, those years show that there are other players in the space and we can work with them to see that's there. Or there may be some other opportunities out there that the board at a policy level would like us to consider. And finally, the inflationary impacts on costs. One of the most significant items you'll see in this budget is the cost of our operational costs are going up. The most specific one is our chemical costs. It is almost doubled, if you will, over a couple years. And that has had a major impact to us. It's gone from an 8.9 million or so impact in 2021 to a budgetary number this year in 22-23 of $17 million. And we're expecting it to go even higher in this proposed 23-24. That line item in itself is causing an impact on our overall financial forecast. And so we need to really understand the costs associated with that and make sure that we are incorporating that where possible. Likewise, we're also seeing increases in the cost to produce capital projects. We are looking at those impacts that are there on some of those projects we're looking at today. Certainly, we want to be mindful of those costs there and how we factor that into the consideration when we set to do these projects and what that means to our rates and charges. And finally, to that last column there, the program delivery and staffing levels. We've identified 3 particular areas here. Greg has sort of outlined some of those areas that we provide services to our community. We do so through the water bottle filling stations, through conservation efforts, through education. We've talked about other areas of where we incorporate that into the service delivery to our communities. We talked about DEIA efforts, talked about pipeline of workforce development. And so each of those things has an impact, if you will, to what it means here for the district. And are we able to do that effectively? Which then brings me to the second bullet point, which is making sure we have the resources necessary for effective program delivery. We know that we want to be responsive to you as the board who provides that policy direction and where they would like those programs to be. But that has, some additional impact to us. And so we are considering some additional staffing requests to be able to consider how will we be able to address that increased needs that are there. And again, that will be a discussion with you, board, on how we are able to effectively respond to you on each of those requests. And finally, under succession planning, we are at a point here where we do have most recently 2 retirements in December, one most recently here announced in February. And there are others that could be on the near-term horizon that we need to consider, and making sure that that transfer of knowledge, if you will, between the staff that are here today and to the other staff that are continuing on, that they have that appropriate knowledge transfer that's there. So we make sure that we, again, provide effective delivery for our programs. So with that, we have all of those sort of ideas, if you will, in our head, and try to grapple, if you will, how to address those matters as we're putting forth this budget. So the gray boxes that you see at the bottom of the slide here shows what are those considerations. So we can certainly look at water sales assumptions. We can look at adjustments to rates and charges. We can talk about prioritization and technical planning, and we can talk about program necessity and staffing requests. I will say for the first 2 items that's there, we do have some sensitivity analysis around there. And again, these are just for example purposes. I'm not saying that these are the numbers, but it gives you sort of a sense of like, if we were to make an adjustment on water sales, what does that look like? And again, we can then go back and say, are we, in a situation where we've hit bottom and there may be a rebound because we had such a tremendous response and we'll see it going forward? Or are we going to be able to, keep the level that we have? Same go forward with rates and charges. If the board is not comfortable with the rate recommendation that we have there, what does it look like if it's lower or higher? Just again, to give you context. The other items, prioritization for CIP technical planning and the program necessity and staffing requests, we really like to delve into that in the second workshop there. But then again, we do have information within this, contained in this workshop here, so that you can sort of see that information, maybe arm yourself with, having those questions ready to go either today or, like I said, at a future workshop. So before I move on, I just wanted to maybe stop there and pause to see if there's any comments or questions regarding what we value as sort of the budget drivers. Are there others that we have missed that you'd like us to consider, and so that we can incorporate that? Okay, with that said, then let's move over to the financial summary. And it's coming up on the slide here. Thank you so much. So what we've done here is we've shown you a side-by-side comparison of our budget for 22-23, and then also our proposed budget for 23-24. First of all, to the budget for 22-23, we have made some adjustments already this fiscal year. So this is to reflect those changes to that budget. Some of those areas were small dollar increases as it relates to, a program. We added some additional dollars, if you will, for the grass replacement program. And we've also saw some increases in our recycled water operations, specifically in chemicals, that took that budget even higher. I think it might have been around $2 million from our original budget to the budget you see today. And so we certainly want to be mindful of the fact that where it is. And we see here, what that impact has been to our coverage there and to the available amounts for PAYGO. So PAYGO is just another way of saying current revenues, net revenues. It's those monies that are available for us to invest back into our system. And so we have about 4.8 million on an adjusted basis for 22-23. Now, looking forward to 23-24, I want to make a few sort of additional comments in this area. Again, we put all the revenues together, the expenses, get to our net revenues divided by our debt service, and you see a coverage there of 115. Now, on a legal, I'm sorry, page 11, thank you. Sorry. My apologies. Yes, if you go, are you there now? Okay, perfect. So if you look there, our legal debt covenant is 115, and you see as presented here, 115 is the number that we have for this year's calculation, and we have a target of 1.75. I do want to clarify that this here represents the operating revenue requirement that's necessary for us here. The district does have one-time revenues that it expects to receive with the completion of a couple of projects. Those projects being the JMM Phase 2 project, as well as the Palos Verdes pipeline. project. And so those monies, roughly around $13 million, are actual revenues that we can consider for the calculation that's there. But I wanted just to kind of set that aside for a moment, because if we don't have those one-time revenues, what do we need to do for a district here to make sure that we have the appropriate increases or the appropriate expenses to ensure that we are meeting that legal debt covenant? So again, the actual numbers will be different, but for the purposes of just determining our operating revenue requirement, you can see we're right there at our legal covenant, but I wanted just to emphasize that that isn't ultimately where we will end for the year. And a part of it is it's the timing associated with it, you know, when the projects move forward, when the agreements are executed, and when we are receiving those funds available to it. But that 115 does tell us there that we are having a tough year because of reduced sales, higher operating costs, and the rate consideration that you may need to consider, because next year we won't have that same 13 million show up. And so we need to make sure, again, as I mentioned always, that the budget that you do, it's not about the 1 year, it's about the long term. And if we make no decision today about rate increases, sure, but that could have a corresponding impact to us in a future year. So I wanted just to make sure I highlight that there, because again, that is an important distinction here. This is making sure that and all the operating revenues and the expenses that we have, that's there. But the technical response, if you will, from a legal debt covenant perspective is I can include those one-time revenues. And I wanted just to make sure I make that distinction for you. The other thing I will say is that the 115 there does make certain assumptions, again, as it relates to rate increases and the amount available for PAYGO. And so we have numbers there. And again, we will do some sensitivity analysis around that. The last thing I will say about our one-time revenues is that one-time revenues is paying, basically reimbursing us for costs that are going out. So it's money going out and the money coming back in. So it's effectively a wash, but for the purposes of calculation, they can be included. So I'll again pause there to see if there's any questions, because I know that that's a particular thing that's there. This is putting us at a point where we want to make sure that you understand where we are today and what that looks like.
The Director Alvarez has a question.
I would like to get additional information on the fiscal year 22-23 final adjustments. I know you mentioned some of those, Margaret, but if you could provide us after this meeting a detailed list of all of the adjustments, and then what was the original amounts and what the adjusted amounts were, and when those adjustments were authorized. On the net revenue side, you spoke to that on the proposed 23-24 budget. If you could also provide us then with a detailed one-time revenues that you were referring to, that I think are either from grants and or contributions this coming 23-24 fiscal year.
Absolutely, happy to do so.
Other questions? The only question I have really fast on this slide, I see you've got revenues going up by about $3 million, it looks like, right? You've got expenses going up by, you know, what, $4 or $5 million, give or take. And then but you also had net revenues down by about 1.6 million, which also coincides with PAYGO down by about 1.6 million. So I know you're going to get in the weeds of this, but really quick, what revenues offhand are we expecting to go up $3 million?
Glad you said that. We'll go to the next page.
Okay.
Perfect lead in, if you will. So turning to our next page there in the presentation is a breakdown of those revenues. And you can kind of see side by side, if you will, what revenues are going up or what are the varying, the changes, if you will. So first, speaking to imported water sales, you can see that imported water sales is going down. Now, I will just say to you that it's compounded, if you will, because water rating, the rates and charges are going up, but their sales assumption is going down. So, but the net effect of it is that the revenues are going down. Likewise, you'll see a corresponding change, if you will, on the other side as well. On our fixed potable revenues, that is made up of two components. That is the pass-through from Metropolitan Water District for the capacity charge. It also includes the district's fixed service charge. This is the charge that we put in place in fiscal year 2018-19. And you can see that that amount is going up. Standby charge, we have a slight dip here in fiscal year 23-24. Again, this is following the judgment that was approved by the court. And so we have a slight dip in here. Actually, in 24-25, we will see a big increase. I think it's next year. We see an increase in our standby charge. And again, that we're just following the settlement on that. Recycled water sales, you see that is increased. Recycled water sales have remained relatively flat as far as acre feet, but we have been able to increase, if you will, the sales, the revenue that we receive from them based off of increases. Fixed capital payments, these fixed capital payments are the payments that we receive from our refineries as it relates to the agreements that we have with them. You see a reduction here. I will just say to you here that as I mentioned earlier, we are negotiating on some of those agreements right now. So this budget assumes that there is no change there. So if the agreement expires and we don't have a new capital fixed payment, then this is the impact. If we are successful in our negotiation to say, hey, we're looking forward to continuing to work with you, and what does that look like? What is those capital fixed payments? Then we would start to incorporate those numbers here for you as well. And then on conservation grants and interest, you see an increase there. I'm just happy to say we're finally getting to see some income coming in from interest income. The rates are much higher. You know that the Fed funds have increased the overnight funds rate. And I think you heard earlier today at the Finance and Administration, one of our liquid funds, if you will, is earning a rate of 4.75. So that is certainly a good thing to say. I will say, though, that the forecast is and again, this is economists and they're right or wrong, depending upon what time of the year you ask them. But we do anticipate that there could be a decline in that interest rate closer to the end of the calendar year, and that could have an impact on rates, but it will still be higher than what we assumed in fiscal year 22-23.
Is the bigger contributor the conservation grant that we're pursuing?
The conservation grant, no, that's actually a smaller portion of it. That we have about 2.9 million or so of that almost 3.5 million that is actually coming from interest earnings. So, all right. With that said, let me turn Oh, please, sorry.
I just want to ask, when you say the conservation grants, usually those aren't those reimbursements to us after we've already expended the money?
Yes, that is correct. So we get money from federal or state grant, or we also get money from Metropolitan Water District through their MAA program. Those monies are considered there. But again, these are known, confirmed grants that's there. So again, I told you we have a pending grant agreement. We have not included those dollars into this budget. And I understand, I think it's in the spring or so that we anticipate hearing about that grant. So if we are successful in that, and before we adopt the budget, we can actually show those dollars here, and it will have a positive impact to the district.
But at the same time, these could be basically reimbursements coming into.
Right. So we're showing the revenues here, and then we show the expenses here. We don't net them. We show them what we refer to as gross. So we show the revenues and the expenses and the expenses. And so that's to give you some indication there. Any other questions? I'm sorry. Oh, please.
Okay, before you move on, I know that you mentioned there's a mixture, but with respect to imported water sales and recycled water sales, for both 22-23 and 23-24, can you provide the actual amount of the quantity of water sold and then the rate that they, the proposed rate, the proposed sale number goes down, but I'd like to know how much volume of water is that we're selling at what price.
Sure, absolutely. And we will, sure. And we will review some of that today, but I think what I hear you saying is you want sort of a side-by-side comparison, and we can bring that back to you.
And whatever assumptions, if you're using a different rate in 23-24 than 22-23.
And again, we have some information in today's presentation, but a side-by-side comparison is what we can provide to you so that you can see that on one page. Absolutely. Any other questions?
No, thank you.
All right. Let's move forward to our proposed expenses. Proposed expenses here, again, imported water purchases. I think, again, we budgeted about 103,000 acre feet, for instance, in fiscal year 22, 23. Going forward in 23, 24, we are seeing a reduction in our water sales, and we'll have a slide on that. But we are assuming 95,000 acre feet. So you can see that that impact there is making a reduction. But that is offset, if you will, by an increase by Metropolitan Water District on their rate. And so therefore that is included here as well. Capacity charge, as I mentioned to you, that is a fixed charge from Metropolitan Water District. And so we do try to balance, if you will, the revenue on one side with the expense so that you there. And I have a slide on that as well. Other program expenses, those are just trying to group all these things so not to make it so small this page, but that includes your public information, includes your technical planning. It includes your water use efficiency. It also includes water policy and resource management. And so those are there. You can see a slight uptick there, and we can get into a little bit more detail on a later slide. This is just to provide you a high level summary. Designated funds, we talked about that, is really just the difference between your revenues and your expenses. So what are you putting aside into your designated fund? We refer to it as PAYGO. And then you see your recycled water operations. Overall, you can see recycled water operations is going up 53 million to 56 million. I said that their sales are relatively flat. We have a slide there to kind of show you what is that increase there. And so we can talk about that. And then your debt service, you can see there has remained relatively flat. I will just share with you that this budget does not assume any new additional debt, except for the fact that we do have a loan, if you will, for the PV lateral and for the JMM. And the way that it works is once those projects are complete, about a year later, we start paying it back. So there is no assumption in fiscal year 23, 24 because of where the completion is, but it should appear in the following fiscal year.
That loan is with who?
DWR. We have two separate, actually technically it's three separate amounts, but they're but all with DWR, one for the JMM, around 15 million, and then 3.9 million for the PV lateral.
Those were all really low interest loans.
Correct, low interest loans. Then just turn our attention to the next page, which has to do with the capital expenditures. These again are proposed for fiscal year 23-24. We've categorized them into the following four areas. One is your new infrastructure treatment assets. Again, we have more detail on this, but I'll just share with you. The most significant portion of that is the completion of the JMM Phase 2 project. There's a small amount in there for the DLD relocation. On to the next area, the customer development, laterals and pipelines. Again, the most significant portion of that budget there is relating to the PV lateral project that the board is currently seeing in front of them. And then there are a number of other pipelines and laterals where we do anticipate getting some external funding from developers and other parties, if you will, to be able to move forward on those projects. So again, I know there's been an ask by the board to see how we can move forward with some of those purple pipe, if you will, but with some external funding. And so that you'll see some more information on that. And then we have some R&R that's there. Again, we understand that we have contractual commitments and we want to make sure that we are putting forth a system that is reliable so that we're able to provide that recycled water to our customers. And so there's a number of projects that are contemplated there, and we have some additional information on that. And then finally, on other projects there, the most significant portion of that has to do with some IT projects, if you will. But there are some other projects here relating to the DLD building here, specifically on taking care of the elevator and I believe the HVAC. With that, you can see the $38.8 million to be spent on CIP is the proposed budget. We will also have a slide later in the presentation that talks about how are we going to pay for that $38.8 million. And so I can maybe address that question when we get to that slide a few pages into this presentation.
Back to these numbers, you spoke to them in generality. Can you also get back to us with specificity of how the components or the subcomponents are. For example, on the rehab and replacement, the 18,900,000+ individually, what are we spending the money on? What are we proposing to spend the money on?
Sure. And again, we have some additional slides in the presentation, more supplemental, and then in your attachment, there's even more detail as it relates to the drivers of why these projects are necessary. So again, we have a very high level on this particular page. I will put a pause on your question. Hopefully I'm addressing it on a later slide. If not, then I will certainly want to revisit that and make sure we're addressing your question there. All right. Any further questions on the CIP slide?
Go ahead.
Okay, so let's go forward a couple slides here, and we're going to now get into some a little bit more specifics as it relates to some of the underlying assumptions relating to our revenues. And so first of all, on our imported water sales, specifically on our retail, we wanted just to provide you a little bit of trend information, and then also sort of what our assumption is for the fiscal year 23-24. So as you can see, the last couple of years, we have been really successful. 2021, 21, 22, these are actual budget versus actual. And you can see we were pretty close to making a right assumption there. I think Mary and I should go to Vegas because we're so good. That being said, we wanted to just bring your attention to 22, 23. That response is a little bit different. We assumed that we would have 103,000 acre feet because we have been moving along at about 103,000 there. But the board said, we want to do more in regards to conservation. We want to outreach. We want to do conservation programs. We want to do a number of things to really drive down that number there because we need to make sure that we have a reliable source of water, not just for our service area, but for the overall region, California as well. And as a result of that, you can see the number there of 95.4 is where we anticipate being at this presentation time. I will say to you, just having produced the February sales, we saw, again, a great response. Part of it, I believe, is conservation. But again, January and February have been the wettest months that we've seen here at the in a while. And that certainly has an impact here. And will we end up at 95.4? Right now, there's some projections that we could be lower than that at 92, 93,000 for the fiscal year. And so the question is, going forward into 23, 24, do we think that, we're, quote, staying steady around 95? Do we think there will be a greater rebound? And the reason I say that is, if I could turn your attention to the next slide. This slide here gives you a sort of a sense of where we were July through January. Again, we were putting information together for this presentation. We weren't quite there with February sales since they were just put together last Friday. But you can see there that, again, where we have been on average is that red line there. And then you look at 23, fiscal year 23, you can see we're much lower than where we have ever been for that there. So we understandably said, I wonder if we should be assuming something less than that 103,000. Should we be at a lower number? And so this, again, is only for the first 7 months. But you can tell there that we anticipate that we would have lower sales at the end of the year. Now the question is if I take you back to 2017, so that little bar there that you see 2017, again below that average there, it's my understanding that was another wet year. So we're experiencing a wet year this year. Back in 2017, we're seeing a wet year, and you can see the following 2 years we had this rebound of sales that are there. So we had a rebound of sales in 18 and 19, and the question is, will the district see a rebound here? And this is the question for you, board. Will we want to continue to say, yeah, that we might see a rebound, and that's good from us, a revenue perspective. As I mentioned, 90% of our revenues comes from our sales. However, if it's important for us to respond to, conservation regardless of time, then, we might want to be more conservative and continue to outreach, continue to conserve, continue to do water use efficiency, and keep that lower number there. So that is sort of a lever, if you will, that we can certainly work with you, board, and understand where you want to be, because there might be investment we need to make from an expense standpoint, or it could be, it is going to be what it is. People are going to go back to their bad habits, start to water their plants when it gets all sunny and bright, over the summer. Or is that something that we want to make sure that we respond to in a different way? So with that, I'll pause here. If you have any additional conversation around that, I will just maybe seek to EJ or Greg to provide additional context there, but wanted just to see that this is what we were seeing and why we were making a lower assumption in fiscal year 23-24.
Questions or comments? That's moment.
Um, You mentioned that this January and February, our water sales have dipped quite a bit, and whether it's conservation or all of the precipitation that we've seen, and it may be driven by precipitation. There's 2 other years that I would like you to go back and see what the delta was for the January, February timeframe. And the wet years were 17, 18 was a very wet year. And 11, 12 or 12, 13, I forget exactly, was a very, very wet year. So it would be interesting to see what percentage drop in water consumption, because I don't think at that time conservation was in place, but not as mindful as I think it is today. But at least it would give us a delta percentage of what we would see in really wet years for those months.
Certainly we can do that. Do you have any maybe initial response?
Well, happy to look at the 11, 12. When I look at the 17, 18 and having experienced it, you can definitely see the rebound. One thing that I think that we forget about, conservation messaging has really created a desire by our communities to conserve. But you can kind of see if you look at the 15 and 16 and then the dip down to 17, it's not there. It actually rebounded a little bit already in 17 as we started to get the rain precipitation. The one thing that, or the few things that I think make this unprecedented, you remember the conservation messaging is out there. Everybody's mindful of it. The governor declared not just an emergency, but specific mandates. And the two that I would point out are every retailer was required to jump up to stage 2 of their water shortage contingency plan. We're at a stage 3. And that limits you to 2 days outdoor watering. Then Metropolitan Water District implemented their State Water Project emergency order, which actually restricted all of those areas to 1 day per week. And we actually, we echoed that because we wanted to share the pain with our neighboring agencies of Las Virgenes and LAWP. So that impacted us. Third, earlier this year, you might recall we had the emergency shutdown of the upper feeder, and that was 0 outdoor irrigation for the entire West Basin service area. And then finally, you have the, as part of the no watering of non-functional turf, and then the storms. It's kind of that, repeated compounding, if you will. So that's how we've gotten to where we are. And we've gone back and we've checked, obviously we want to make sure that we give you a conservative approach to it. But if you were to ask any of our retailers or Metropolitan Water District, they're definitely projecting that rebound. We think that looking at maybe trying to maintain our agency and our service area at 95, that's the strategy or goal of saying we don't want to see that rebound. We want to remain efficient. And that's how staff came up with that. So just wanted to touch on that, but we will check on the 11 and 12.
Anything else, Director Alvarez? Really quick before you go from that, I guess what I would like us to definitely look at is under the assumption that the residents are not going to hopefully jump up to the peak that came after the last cycle, because it's such a different universe now, and there has been a number of things happen that have hardened, like taking out more grass and so on and so forth. I think that hopefully will translate. We're just not going to have as much water sales we can rely upon. And like I was saying earlier today in the F&A, because I think we've had these projections where we're not meeting them. So I think we should be much more conservative on what we expect to be the next couple of years. That would be my perspective. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, let's turn our attention to the next slide there, which is our barrier sales. And so with our barrier, we have both the West Coast barrier as well as the Dominguez Gap that we sell to WRD. And in that discussion, we wanted to, of course, look at the history of sort of where we have been overall, as well as what we think going forward. We certainly are aware of the efforts that are out there that could certainly continue to lessen, if you will, sort of the anticipated sales, certainly by the imported water. So at the top of the page, you see the West Coast Barrier. We did go back and look at a 10-year history of sort of what our water sales have been for total injection, if you will, into the West Coast Barrier. We assumed overall about a 15.5. It might be a little bit less than that, but the idea is that we're like, if it's going to be 15.5 as the injection that's there. And again, you saw in fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22, much lower than that, but we did have prior years that were much higher than that. And so we wanted to keep that average there at 15.5. We then said, what can we produce on our side? Based off of what we are able to do and produce there with our facilities, we assumed that we would do about 10,000 acre feet for recycled. And therefore the delta, if you will, is the imported water sales. Because again, if we're not meeting it with recycled water, ultimately we won't want to do that. We know overall that I think one of the goals and visions, if you will, for this board, and again, this is for you to continue to share with us, is that we want to help them, get off of imported water to use recycled water. And so, what are the circumstances that we need to do there? Is that capital investment? Is it something else? That's what we need to work through. On the Dominguez Gap, that number that you see there is about where we anticipate being for the year, around 1730, maybe more or less. So we did lower our assumption as it relates to the Dominguez Gap sales. However, in that area there, we are also mindful that there is a project for I understand it's called the Second Gap Connection, where that once that is in place, that then those sales will come from Terminal Island with LADWP, and then we will essentially wean ourselves off, or they will wean off sales off of imported water that's there. And so we do expect that in future years that we will probably start to see this become a much smaller number, if not zero in future years. And so those are our assumptions relating to barrier sales. And certainly those are, all the considerations that's there. We, do want to be mindful of what our, the county and WRD are assuming. But we've looked at what we understand has been the overall sort of injection into the barrier, what we can produce on our side in recycled, and came up with these numbers that you see here on this slide. So again, I'll just take a pause and see if there's any questions on sales. Let's move on then to the next slide, which is on our recycled water sales. I will just share with you, this page is it shows you the graph, if you will. I know it's a little busy because we're showing like 5 years or 5 bars, if you will. The next slide actually provides you the numbers. So if you are more of a numbers person and not a graphical person, then you can certainly look at that slide there. But we show here our different types of water quality that we produce. The barrier, you can see there, unfortunately, in fiscal year 21-22, because of the Hyperion spill and our response to how we were able to meet the demands of our customers, you see a very small number there in 21-22 actuals. But you do see that starting to increase, if you will, in 22-23. Not quite as what we expected from a budgetary standpoint. And that's why, again, we've looked at a reduction in our sales there. Moving over to the Nitrify, this is Nitrify to all of our refinery customers, so Marathon, the Torrance Refinery, and for Chevron. Again, you see here that we have the sales projections there. In that blue bar that you see there, you see a slight dip there. There was an assumption made in the recycled water budget for last year that there would be a project that we would move forward with on a tank replacement. And so if we were doing that tank replacement, we would have had a reduction in our recycled water sales, but then we would have had an increase on our imported water sales. That project did not move forward. And as a result of that, that project is still on hold. And so we've, if you will, resumed a higher number, if you will, because certainly from an actual or projected at least, we do anticipate we'll be at that higher level. Under the single pass RO, again, looking at those numbers there, you see a slight dip in the actual for 21-22. Also, a little bit of a response, sort of that immediate summer. If you recall, we did a couple of years ago, we did some analysis as it relates to the impact of of that. And also actually a little bit of the COVID impact onto our refineries that we saw a little dip there. But double pass RO, you can see, has remained relatively flat, as well as our disaffected tertiary. And so using those assumptions, again, numbers have remained fairly consistent. And if you want to see the specific numbers, that is on the next slide there for you to take a peek at. So again, I'll pause there to see if you have any questions on our water sales assumption. But again, overall, we're seeing a relatively sort of flat, if you will, on our sales there as we continue to deliver to our customers.
Any questions?
No, thank you.
All right, very good. Now let's turn our attention. We talked about the sales side. The other side of the equation is what is the rate. So if we can go one more slide, thank you. This here is the proposed rate and charge for our West Basin imported Tier 1 water rates. And we've done a comparison for you here. As a reminder, our rates and charges for West Basin Municipal Water District changes typically on a fiscal year, but the changes from Metropolitan Water District, where we pass through that cost, changes on a calendar year basis. So we've shown 3 columns for you here. First, in that first year, first column, you see current rate. So this is the rate that we're charging today. So 3 components make up the rate. So if you will, our water rate resolution is really just showing that bottom line of 1,587. But again, that's made up of 3 components: the met rate of 1209, the readiness to serve charge, our district charge of reliability service charge, and then that gives you the total of 1587. We've moved forward into July 1, 2023. We have made an assumption there to increase the reliability service charge. It goes from 257 to 283. Effectively, it's a 10% increase, and we can talk about that as far as our sensitivity around that number. But again, that was the number that we had identified. And that's the only rate that is, if you will, that's changing as of July 1, 2023. Therefore, increasing the rate from 1587 today to a proposed rate increase to 1613. But then we move forward to January 1, 2024. January 1, 2024, that's when MET increases its rate. And the MET increase on the rate from their Tier 1 rate has gone from 1209 to 1256. So you can see that rate increase there of about $47. Can I do math? Yes, $47 for the Tier 1 rate. And the readiness to serve charge, you see an increase there. And we'll go into that in a following slide to show you how we come up with that. And then again, the reliability service charge, again, doesn't change in January because of the fact that we historically have made that change on a fiscal year basis. So you now see the rate increase from 1613 to 1685. Again, the reason for it in 2024, January 1, 2024, is because of the net increases. So overall, if you look at today's rate of 1587 to the rate in January 1, 2024, so year over year, we're seeing about a 6.2% increase on the rates and charges, or on the rate here. We'll go into a little bit more detail on some future slides. So maybe if I go through those slides, and then we'll take some questions at that point. So if I can just turn your attention. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Director Allen.
I just want to stay on this slide for a second.
Sure.
So liability service charge is the rate that West Basin charges. And this is what our revenue is based on. This is what we put on top of the net rate.
Correct.
What this budget is predicated on is that we are assuming, for purposes of this budget, for this particular slide, that the board will adopt a rate for the new fiscal year effective July 1 of $283 versus the current rate of $257. So we're going to raise our rates by 10%. That's the assumption in this budget that you presented today.
That is the assumption that I've stated, and yes, that is what we've assumed for this budget, correct?
So that will account for whatever growth is projected in this budget, et cetera, and that's what we need to focus on.
Correct. So again, it's a mix of, if you will, it's one of those levers to again, depend upon what your expenses are, depending on what your sales are, pretending, all those sort of factors there. This has become sort of I'll say the last lever that we tried to, to switch Again, one of the other consideration is what are your financial metrics that you're trying to achieve? And again, I mentioned about the one-time revenue, setting that aside. If we did not have that one-time revenue, in order to achieve that coverage, that minimum legal covenant, if you will, we would need to have an increase in order to achieve that. Now, there's some questions there. You can change your water sales assumptions, you can reduce your expenses, you can do a combination of both. That's the conversation that we will have with you, board, to make sure that we're getting to a place that's there. Because is 10% a comfortable place or not? That is for you to share with us.
Something else?
Well, my other,
Right.
I have a follow-up comment on that, just for consideration. When we raised the rates last year, the rate increase was $12. We went from basically $245 an acre foot to the $257 an acre foot that you're showing here. And this year, you've based the budget on a rate increase of $26, which is over twice the increase from last year. I'm sure that we're going to see why that, what the numbers are that make up that, the need for that. But it seems to me that that is a very large increase to have assumed. And there are certain expenses that may be looked at more closely, that we have more control of. I understand that we don't have control over all of our expenses, but I think we have control over more expenses than not. And it's kind of shocking that we would, last year we had a lot of discussion to settle at a $12 increase in our rates, and that this year we're going in assuming we're going to increase it $26, which is over twice as much as we increased it last year. Just from a fiscal responsibility point of view, I find that kind of galling.
Understood. And again, we will share with you, again, trying to meet the program demands, the increasing costs. That is something that, again, there are additional, I'll call it levers, what is in the control of what we need to do. And we will hone in on where we believe that we want to put our energy to have that discussion, where we want to prioritize things, what we want to consider, so that we can be more responsive to, do we want to change that increase on the reliability service charge?
Great, thank you. Now, before you go on, I do want to also say something on this slide, just so we understand and public understands. So MWD did a 2-year budget, right? And they, if I recall, you got to remind us, but they set the rates for 2 years out, right? And pass it on to us, correct?
That is correct.
So we are going, this is taking in the second year of what they've already passed, right?
Correct.
Okay. So the top 2 lines here are purely the pass-through costs to us, correct?
Correct. And we will go into more details on the following
I
slide.
understand, but I want to set the page here while we're talking about it. So what I'm getting at is we have no control over lines 1 and 2 right here. Met already passed that along to us last year, so we're basically now inheriting it for our next fiscal year as well, correct? Right? Okay. But the reliability service charge is our own charge, which, by the way, if I was going to do this and I would really ask staff, I would put WB in front of that or something, because right now it says MWB on the other 2. But it says reliability service charge, and unless you told me or I really read down below, I would not know where that came from. So what I would say is it's WB reliability service charge, which I do know below says that represents our charge to cover costs and programs. And then the other thing, I think Director Alvarez did put this well, is that's what we can control, obviously, right? That's what, we have adjustments on in this process, right, Margaret? Okay. Because I think number one, by the way, a lot of folks in the general public, they don't understand that Met passes a 2-year budget, and so we adjust things on ours 1 year here, 1 year there. And so we are inheriting what's already been done. We cannot control the top 2 items. It's the third one we can control at this point, right? Got it. Thank you. All right, Mr. General Manager, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment, because we had a conversation in a previous meeting about having a policy discussion with the board prior to maybe presenting numbers. But it seemed that the board preferred to have, let's just jump right into it. Let's get into the numbers. And so here we are. And so we have some assumptions that have been made, and we have some metrics that we're trying to make sure are appropriate for the financial position of the district. But it seems that perhaps what we're presenting is being considered offensive to one board member.
Number one, I wouldn't say that. Let's not go there right now. What I would say is, every director can have an opinion. We understand that. And now, of course, we need to see where this number came from, which I see Margaret alluded to how this number came about. So what I would do is, let's go through the numbers and figure it out. But what I was also saying too is this is where we can control whatever the outcome is we want. So thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So giving us some additional flavor, but you thankfully, you led me into it. Next slide, please. Here is just again to reemphasize again that the MWD imported water rate tier 1 has been already approved by the Metropolitan Water District Board in April of 2022 for both calendar year 23 and calendar year 24. And so you can see that their rate of 1209 to 1256 is a 3.9% increase. I know there was a lot of discussion last year or 22 when this was discussed as to what is the appropriate rate that could be. I think originally were thinking 5 and 5, and they came back and all that stuff. But again, this is the approved rate increase effective January 1, 2024.
Thank you, Margaret, really fast on that too, because that was the other thing. Remember, there was a lot of discussion up front from that where they were proposing to go, and then it got ratcheted down, if you will. And so what was that?
My recollection, unless EJ remembers something different, was like a 5 and 5, and then we came back with something lower in both of those years.
Yeah.
That is correct. And I think most people that are following and tracking MWD activities would probably expect them to take a look back at that. As just pointed out, they did recommend a much more significant rate increase. Just like West Basin, they are seeing a lot of additional expenses due to supply chain issues and just inflation and the cost of doing business. And of course, now with these storms, I know a lot of people are seeing a lot of water, and so that's a very positive thing. But it'll actually really hurt the MWD bottom line. You will have some member agencies that have access to water on their own and outside of the MWD service area that could potentially be 100% off of MWD water supplies. So when you put all those expenses on what they would call the wet water, the cost of wet water per met, if people aren't buying that water, then all of those programs suffer. And you'll know that through litigation, they've actually taken the demand management aspect. They're paying for that out of their reserves. And then ultimately, just last year, the member agencies agreed to place that on the cost of wet water. So if they're selling a lot less water, but they're extending out their programs like grass replacement and all of their great conservation programs, they are going to see a hit on their bottom line. So they may be looking at revamping their budget, as I believe was directed by the general manager, Mel Hutchkhalil, at the time.
But for now, they did the 2-year.
This is what we anticipate.
This is what we're working with.
They would need to basically go back and open up their budget. They're going to amend that.
Thank you, and thank you, Margaret. Again, these are the costs we anticipate. We have no control over this, right? Just purely pass.
We are passing them through. As
Go
we
ahead.
partly done so. So let's move our attention now to the second line item, as you referred to it, President Houston, which is the next slide on our readiness to serve charge. So readiness to serve charge is a fixed charge to each of the member agencies. West Basin Municipal Water District is one of its 2 agencies that I believe that collected on its commodity charge. So rather than have Met collected on their behalf, we many years ago, I think it even predates me, we made the decision to actually collect that on our commodity charge. So we are taking a fixed charge and we are then converting that on a per acre foot basis. It is a number that they have a budget associated with it. Everybody takes their prorated share there, and that prorated share is based off of a 10-year rolling average of their water sales. So depending upon how you respond, if you will, to reducing your importance could affect your rate. And if you are more conserve more water than your counterparts, then your percentage will go down, and so on and so forth. So this here is just to give you sort of context, if you will, of how that information is calculated. But if we move to the second page there, or the next page, you can see the factors that have why are part of the reasons that we see this going up. First of all, on a calendar year basis, for calendar year 23, we see that the collection that Metropolitan Water District is looking to collect is $154 million. They see that the number going up to $167 million in calendar year 24. So henceforth, one of the reasons why that you see that's there. Our percentage there is about 8% to the total. So of whatever the amount is, West Basin will pay a portion of it. Now, in order to calculate this number, we then look at, well, there is a change that's done on a calendar year basis. So the, if you will, their second half, our first half of the year for 23, if you will, if you take that $154 million, 8%, you take that number and then you say half of the year, you see that half of the year, we're going to pay $6 million. For the second half of the year, we're going to pay about $6.7 million because again, the budget has increased. The rate percentage is still the same percentage, 8%, and we're going to pay that for half the year. So overall, we see that rate to be about $12.9 million. So that is the amount that West Basin will have to pay Metropolitan Water District for this fixed cost. Now, as I mentioned to you, we collect that on our commodity charge. And so this is one of the other factors that is why you see an increase on this rate here. Last year, we assumed 103,000 acre feet as far as acre feet to do that. Actually, 106 when I take Dominguez Gap into consideration. So we had 106,000 acre feet that we're using with that number. And so when you take that number and you divide it by 106, you get to a certain rate. Now, if you are assuming lower sales, that's going to further exacerbate, if you will, what that increase is going to be. So in a way, we don't have control over it, meaning like how much we need to pay. We do have control over what that rate could be if we say, you know what, maybe we're being too conservative with the 95,000, maybe 97,000 is the right number, maybe 100,000. If you change that number of your sales, then that will change what this rate will be. So I want to be clear there that this number could change if you come back and tell us, don't use 95, use a different number. So if you say 95, no, I don't like 95, I think it should be 93, then that's going to make this rate go even higher because one way or the other, we need to pay, we're trying to collect what we need to pay. And so we're trying to balance it there with a sort of an unknown there. What is, our RTS going to, what is our sales going to be? And so, so with the assumption that's there, and again, 6 months out of the year is one rate, 6 months out of the year is another rate, we do anticipate that this rate would increase from $121 per acre foot to $146 starting January 1, 2024. So again, I'll pause there because that's, I want to say slightly different than what you said, President Houston, but there's a reason it is fixed, but it's fixed with a variable side of it. So, just to complicate matters a little bit.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. Well, first of all, any questions on that?
Water's moving all the time.
So we are only one of two agencies that does this particular.
Yeah.
way.
Remember the other agency? No, I don't. I don't want to misspeak. So I believe that my understanding we're one of two.
Does that put us at a disadvantage, right, when we're doing this or not?
I don't know if it does. I think it's just, my understanding of what I heard years ago is that we wanted to share to our customers what the true cost of that water was. So you're not having it over on somewhere, like on your property tax bill, but rather that you're seeing it here or however Metropolitan is collecting it for its other customers. So they wanted to show that number here. So I will say when we compare ourselves to our peer agencies, we do look higher because of this particular number.
The other thing in all that would be, so I totally get it. Depending on the assumption you make, which goes into the budget, which sets a rate.
Yeah.
That we all have to live by. Have we been missing the mark in the past because we thought we were going to sell more and then this is what we passed and.
Yeah, so if I go back a few slides, just to give you sort of more recent things, and that will be Well, to me, it's page 12. So go back 8 slides, if you will. If you look there, and this is the slide I'm referring to, which has the bar graphs, if you will. So if you will, we budgeted 103. We came in at 103,955. Yes, it's on the screen now. And so if you see that there, you can say, okay, so we got a little bit higher than what we were supposed to, 955 acre feet. So, but again, this is what we're trying to do. Now you fast forward to fiscal year 22, 23. We assumed that we were going to be doing it based off 103,000 acre feet. Now we're at 95, which means that we're coming out of pocket to pay for that fixed cost. And so it doesn't matter. I think, over the years, there, probably is a wash, if you will. But in this short window, you can see that we've had a greater impact in this current fiscal year because, again, there was such a response to our conservation efforts and the weather, if you will, that has impacted our sales. And so that's something to be mindful. So again, as we look forward to doing cost of service, perhaps analysis here, maybe this is an area that we as an agency can look at. Maybe we don't want to collect it on a fixed basis. On a variable basis. Maybe we want to change the way we collect it, which is maybe we'll do the same thing Met does, 10-year rolling average, and we will then be able to collect it that way. That's perhaps a future consideration for this board, but historically, we've always looked at it this way. And one of the reasons we were tied to it, if you will, to continue this there is if we look to some of our agreements that we have, they were tied to their increases in your Met, and it included all the components. The West Basin component, the MWD, tier 1, and the MWD RTS. So if you take RTS out of it, what does that mean? And so as we are negotiating new agreements, we are in a better position to maybe perhaps consider something different there. And that's something that, again, that cost of service can help us really say, how do we know we have to pay this cost? What's a different way that we can do that? That doesn't impact other ways that we're collecting revenues.
At it now. And so I think, yeah, that's something that, especially if we, in the long run, anticipate we're probably not going to be selling as much water, especially imported water, there's probably something we'll have to take a look at. So
Yeah. That and if we assume that there's going to be that variability that we're seeing this year, again, we want to try to collect fixed costs with fixed revenues. And so that we're not over or under collecting, but we're collecting what is appropriate. And so that's what we've done with our capital capacity charts. That's another Metropolitan Water District pass through. We have to pay 2.4 million or 2.3 million, whatever the number is. We want to make sure that if that's what we're paying, that's what we're collecting. And we've adjusted rates to that. And we'll get to that in a couple slides.
thank you. Go ahead. Next.
All right, so let's go back a few more slides. Again, to me, page 21, 25, thank you. I'm so
Okay.
sorry. I printed it without the packets, so I apologize. This is, again, to give you a history of what our reliability service charge has been over the years. Again, we have some sensitivity around this number. And so again, rather than spending any more time here, we just wanted to provide you that history, again, to remind you that the reliability service charge is to pay for the district's programs and activities. So, reliability is, we think of it as our recycle water program, as our conservation program, as our education program, as our policy efforts, if you will. Those are the, kind of things that we think as being reliable. Now, we've done some things over the years where we introduced a fixed service charge so we can try to somewhat address the variability of sales. So we can get a fixed revenue coming in and so not being as hampered by it. And during that period of time, we, kept that fixed service charge. Are you okay? I just watched him in anger. Angst and pain. Sorry, I meant to point that out. But anyways, during that fixed period of time, you can see we kept that rate flat because we wanted to make sure that we were not upping it on both sides, but rather, that we were trying to see that there. So anyways, we'll do more on fixed service, on the reliability service charge. More as we'll give you some sensitivity around that, but really this is, at the heart of it, one of those big levers, the last lever, if you will, of what we want to be able to accomplish. So, all right, let's move on to the next slide here. And I wanted just to point out here, my apologies, I have an error on this slide and I just want to point that out to you. the bottom line numbers are correct, but my assumption around the West Basin rates are, somehow I missed updating it appropriately. Where it says 11,025, that number should read 9,135 and 9,135.
9,135
Yeah.
on the right.
Yeah, so on the right, the upper one, so July 1, 2023, where you see 11,025, that should read 9,135. Oh, I'm getting a real-time change. I love that. And then the second one, that proposed rate is 9,605. So my apologies, in my review, I noticed that I didn't have that corrected. But the end result is the same. And really the point of this here is on the left side is what West Basin needs to pay. West Basin needs to pay the first 6 months of the year, 10,600 per CFS. And the second half of the year, the MWD rate is 10,800. Now, in that number there, you can see that there's a slight increase for what we're going to have to pay Metropolitan for beginning January 1, 2024. Now, go over to the right side. This is what we anticipate collecting for our customers. And this is what I was saying. Overall, we're going to be trying to match that number overall. 2,378, 380 on one side, 2,378, 620. The reason that is not exact is because we don't do pennies, we do dollars, but we try to get it as close as possible so that you can see that we're really trying to collect exactly what, or as close as we can to what we have to pay. And as a result of that, you can see while we're paying 10,600 for the first half of the year, we're only charging our customers 9,135. For the second half of the year, it goes from 10,800, what we're paying, to 9,605. The reason for that is because when we collectively, West Basin peaks with Metropolitan Water District is at one time, but our individuals customers peak at different times. And as a result of that, if we were to take all their individual peaks, we can see that the CFS are different. And as a result of that, we're able to pass through that savings, if you will. So whereas they're showing 255, then we see that number there. So I just wanted to share that with you to be able to do that there. And again, I apologize for doing that. I know the bottom line is correct. Somehow I didn't edit correctly on this slide, but the end result is that the net is a net zero to us, or as close to net zero. And again, this is a 3-year peaking charge that they look at. And so they want to see where you peak and then take the highest one and use that as their number that's there. Let's move on to the next slide, which is the fixed service charge. Again, this is, I'll say, another way of your levers, if you will. So depending upon, well, let me step back and what this fixed service charge is. So again, we were trying to address sort of the variability of sales and by trying to get a fixed service charge here. So we went through a process of going through an analysis. We presented that board. The board approved it in 1819, or probably a little bit before 1819, to be first implemented in 1819. We took 3 years to implement that sort of ramp up of that rate. And as a result of that, we are saying, well, how are we going to do that? We're going to base it off of 2 different programs because those programs are one in which, you know, we see relatively sort of similar budgets sort of year over year. And then we are looking at a 3-year rolling average to our customers. And so on this side here, we kind of show you what that budget is. So 2021, 21, 22, 22, 23, those are the numbers, if you will, that are the sum of the 2 budgets. So for fiscal year 23, 24, when we look at the sum of those 2 budgets, it's 6.8 million. Yeah, 6.8 million. So you can see there's been about a $300,000 increase there. So if by chance the board goes back and goes, you know, I don't want to do that project, I don't want to do this thing, or, oh, I want to do more, this number will change as a result of the sum of those 2 budgets. So in a way, you have control over this number depending upon how we look at that particular budget. And there are some other costs that are allocated to it. And so if we make changes in that allocation, that certainly can have an impact here. So again, we anticipate that number being $6.8 million. We do have more information about these in our supplemental slides. I will just mention that they're on page 45 of 46. I'm not going to go there now, but it tells you like what would be that impact to the individual customer so that you can see what that is. But again, if that number changes, then those numbers will change as well. So I've just shared you the overall on this page. I've given you more details below so that if you wanted to see what the impact are to customers that are in your service area, that's there, again, page 45 and 46 of your slide deck here. Well, I should say my slide deck. I don't know what page it really is. What?
At 4.
As for, so 49 to 50. So, so sorry. All right, so again, I'll just take a pause there to see if there's any questions. Again, as we move forward and hopefully we can proceed forward with the cost of service, this is an area too that we can certainly look at. Is this approach still appropriate and sort of where we are today? This is an area that, again, we can explore, but the way that we have it set today, this is how it's being calculated.
Let's go ahead, next slide.
All right, so next slide gets into our recycled water rates. These are the ones that are not per agreement that we have, by our other side of things. So under our inside service area, it does include our sales to the disaffected tertiary customers. I will say also that Chevron Nitrified follows this tiered rate structure, as well as on the outside service areas, again, to the city of Torrance and the city of Los Angeles. Within the outside service area, the way that their current agreement is with the boiler feed assumes is also on this tiered rate structure. But I will say that we are currently in discussion with the Torrance refinery as well as the city of Torrance to talk about their agreement since they do expire August 31st, 2023. And so we will perhaps have a different things. For the purpose of this budget, we have assumed that we'll continue to follow this path until we know something different. And so with that, effectively what we've tried to do here is to take a look at what are the corresponding impact that's there. So if you look at the rate for July 1, 2023, that rate there is effectively the average rate of our Tier 1 West Basin rate. So if we look at what the rate is as of July 1 and the rate as of July 1, January 1, 2024, that is the average rate there because we're saying we want to encourage, people to do that, but we're also trying to do that there. We'll show a slide later on that shows the average rate, the average unit cost for our recycled water. And so you can see that has been, again, a very significant increase there. And so again, if you change, if you will, one of the components, such as a reliability service charge, this could certainly change this rate as well. Because again, we want to try to encourage people to, use recycled water to lessen their dependence on imported water. And the outside service area, it's always been historically the differential between the inside outside is $42 per tier. And so we just kept that in place for the purposes of this rate here.
Mr. Chair, I have a question if I could.
Yes, Director Gray, go ahead.
Thank you, Margaret. And your assumptions, do you have anything that might impact, that would have an impact on any interruption of our recycled water facilities? In terms of your assumptions, do you build any percentage of perhaps do some interruption in the supply?
That's a great question. Let me pause on that one. Yeah, I mean, there are assumptions around water sales. There are assumptions on costs. I might have to get back to you on that question. I have to think about that one a little bit more.
Okay.
Dallas has an answer on that one.
Okay, thanks, though.
Yeah, and just to perhaps maybe, since there was a question asked, if I could just ask you to maybe go to page 56 of your presentation. It's one of our supplemental slides. But I do think it's important for you to see sort of what it is. So again, I did my math right. It's the, no, that's not the right one. Go back one maybe. There, that one there. So this one here is our recycled water operations. And again, this is just sort of to provide you context, if you will, of the overall recycled water operations. So assuming a budget of $56 million, 56.6, assuming the acre feet that we have of 33,000 acre feet, we assume that the average unit cost is about 1,714. So again, the rate that we're charging on the inside service area is less than that. We're trying to get up to sort of that average rate that's there, but also we do internally try to understand what the cost is to produce each type of water so that we can try to match that up there. And so it is it's a large lift, if you will, to get there. But you can see over the years, the unit cost has really been greatly impacted. Last year, we were at a budget of 1,560. Previous year, we're at 1,245. These are big increases that are happening on our recycled water side. And so how are we going to be able to pass that forward onto our customers is, again, another perhaps policy conversation. If you wanted to get us all the way there, we certainly can. And then we just need to be mindful of that, of what that means to the customers that do that. And so we were trying to temper that, if you will, with the understanding that, again, we have a reliability service charge that's for all program projects that we do here at the agency. So again, just wanted to share that as context on what we were considering there. And again, another important conversation as we look forward to, and I'm sorry that I keep repeating it, but that cost of services would be really important for us to continue to move forward to make sure that we are balancing, if you will, all objectives that the district has here with setting the rates and charges appropriately.
I know Director Alvarez has a question, but hold on one second. Why do you have the slide up here? I did see just one item is the software licenses. You're projecting a much higher expenses just for software
And
licenses.
yeah, I'm happy to address
What
that.
is that about?
So there was some software licensing that we need to do for our SCADA system that wasn't previously licensed through the district. And so we have taken that on. So my IT team, for instance, has assisted in making sure that we have appropriate software license there.
That's very,
Yeah, it was about like, I think, 48,000 on that software license alone. So.
got it. Okay, with that, let's go to, I think Director Alvarez had a question.
The presentation, Margaret, you mentioned that these rates included the Chevron nitrified and the boiler feed for the Torrance refinery. Did I misunderstand that?
That is correct. So, I'm sorry, please.
These are the rates for Chevron nitrified and boiler feed at Torrance,
Correct.
as well as basically the purple pipe rate.
That is correct.
And the rates as proposed, which are an increase over the current year. I think you talked about this when we looked at this particular table showing the increase. This is not a full recovery rate producing the water. So this is still a subsidized rate.
That is correct.
And is the rate then made up of what's the components that make up that rate? If you produce more water, would the rate actually your costs go down? Or if you produce less water, or is that insensitive to it?
So certainly, the more or less is, the costs for those variable costs, if you will. So those variable costs include, one of those variable costs is the secondary effluent. That's a fixed rate to us. We pay $7.50 per instance per acre foot for it, currently under our agreement. And so that, so if we sell more acre feet, effectively that doesn't change. And so I don't know that it really is impacted by the additional acre feet, because if we assume that if I can produce 1 acre foot or a 5 acre foot with the same sort of fixed costs, meaning the facility replacement or the facility maintenance, the the contract labor, if I can do all those things, I'll say it's in, it doesn't have that impact there. And so if I sell more, then, am I collecting enough, to pay for those variable costs? And that's the question there, because again, I shared with you earlier on that the cost for chemicals has been sky high, and that's where I feel, we that has impacted our financials or at least our budgetary financials for this fiscal year 23-24.
Do you have any questions on that, Rick?
I understand the need in the past for declining block rate structure. As we move forward, I'm not quite sure that the justification for a declining block structure.
I would agree with you. And again, I think one of the things we've talked about here, most of our, I'll say, our irrigation customers, our purple pipe customers are at that lowest tier. And so.
Desiree, can you go back to the slide with the,
Oh, yes.
we're talking about the recycled water rate slide.
Yes, slide
Put it back here.
28.
So then can you continue forward, but reframe that for a moment so we're all caught up?
Sure.
For the block rate.
So I agreed with you. And again, cost of service, I think, will help us really get to making sure the Chevron nitrified is paying for the cost of Chevron nitrified, that the irrigation customers, pipe, tertiary, whatever you want to call them, that they're paying for what it costs to be able to do that. And again, there may be some places where we may need to subsidize through the reliability service charge, but again, reliability service, that's what we're trying to provide here for the district here. We have looked at sort of what it would be if we were just to have a single rate. It doesn't actually move the dial that much, unfortunately. We certainly can do that if you direct us to, is to have a single rate. But again, we believe that in moving forward with our cost of service, sorry, broken record here, but if we move forward with the cost of service, I do think that we can really reshape the way that we look at that, because there was a reason, when this rate was, methodology was established some 25 years ago, when we were incentivizing people to get on to recycled water. But the difference is different now. The story is different, and we need to modernize, if you will, the way that we approach this. Outside of we can make changes here before we have a cost of service, or do we, move forward with the cost of service and come back with another sort of rate rate philosophy, if you will, around there. And that's, goes back to sort of one of those budget drivers is what is that philosophy? How do we want to handle that going forward?
Sure, okay. Anything else, Director?
No, that's it for right now.
And on that note, though, they're obviously very different water qualities, right? I mean, so it kind of.
Right. And as we talked about the future direction, if we are start to, consider our partnership with, maybe Metropolitan Water District on their Pure Water Southern California, there's a higher level of water that you're getting from there. It would change certainly the way that we are delivering water to our customers. And so it could be more of a sort of a single rate anyways. And so all of that is, takes into consideration of how we are trying to approach this. And I think you and I, President Houston, have talked about this is sort of a transitory sort of budget as we are planning for that future. But how do we make sure that we address the needs that we have today as we are looking forward to what the future looks like? And it really gets into that discussion there.
Yes, exactly. Okay, by the way, here's what I'm gonna do. Before we get into the next section, which is expenses, we will take a break. We'll take a break in a few moments, okay? But slide, I do have you don't have the percentage change laid out here. And we can just see there's an adjustment. But for what it's worth, Margaret, I mean, how do you come up with these increases per se from, this adopted from last year to proposed for this year? I mean, just hypothetically.
So I think I shared with you that the average rate for our West Basin Tier 1 rate at July 1 and our West Basin rate at January 1, 2024, if you take the average of the rate of those things, it's 1,649. So what I was trying to do is see that, that there is a rate that's there, but also being mindful of the fact that the average rate is 1,714. Historically, we have always, I would say several years ago, we have looked at this rate as whatever been the increases on the potable side. We want to have the same increases on the recycled water side. And so we went up $10 on potable side. We go up $10 on the recycled side. even though that the cost increases have been higher, but again, there was a great philosophy at that time that we wanted to keep a discount because we were trying to incentivize people to get to this thing. So we were trying to keep a discount. And I think the current thinking around, at least among this management team, is that do we need to still have that incentive there for people to go to recycled? We want them to have reliable water, and recycled water is a way for them to have reliable water. And so that's why we're trying to get that there. So trying to move the dial to get them a little bit closer to that unit cost, but also to take into consideration of where our potable water rate is. Does that answer your question?
Any other questions? Okay, I know it's been a long session already, so why don't we take about a 8-minute break before we go into the next one, which is expenses, if that's all right, and we'll go ahead and do that. We'll take a break.
So how long is the next?
Is Gloria still with us?
Well, I just want, I'm apologizing. I just want you to know where I'm coming from. So, thank you so much.
We are back in order from our break. Thank you very much. I do want to our best ability, let's try and finish up before 6 o'clock tonight. Anytime, is Director Gray still with us? She's not. Okay, so you still have 4 of us here. So let's go ahead and continue on with the expenses. So Greg, if you will just in that effort, thank you.
Well, I mean, it'll be our executive manager of finance who will lead us in the remainder of our discussion here. So please carry on.
Excellent. So my understanding is we're on page 30 of your packets. And it's up on the screen here. So again, talking about the expenses and we're focused here on our operating program expenditure summary. So we decided to take a slightly different approach this year, just to kind of show you sort of on a programmatic basis, the slide here on page that you see on the screen here. Where do you see those big shifts, if you will, in the dollars there? So if we're not seeing like a big change, for instance, not to say that we couldn't focus the attention there, but if we're not seeing a big change and that change seems appropriate, then we can do that. The next slide will focus on accounts. So we can then say, okay, if it's a program and an account, let's understand that. And that's where we would like to focus our high level energy, if you will, on our next workshop that's there. But just to give you a sort of, again, a side-by-side comparison here. The first line you see there, water use efficiency conservation, you can see an increase there of about $795,000. Again, we are making certain assumptions about programs there. We do have a new program there to work with the landscape, and it also assumes certain levels of support for our grass replacement program. And those costs there you see of about almost $2 million, a slight increase, if you will, from over last year. Again, so this is, again, our response to continue to, in our effort to do this. So again, if conservation, water use efficiency is important to us, we have programs to support that effort there. The offside of that is that we have certain revenues assumed there for for conservation income. And that could be greater if we are successful in our award for our landscape program.
May I interrupt really fast on this? So just so we know, with all of these, the background details, is that part of the supplemental slides?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Let me explain that. So here is the high level here. So for instance, if we wanted to really see what the water use efficiency conservation is, we have, if you go to page 48 plus 4 is 52. So if we go to that slide there.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, but if you go to that page there, you would then see like, here's the details that make up that $3.1 million.
Perfect.
And then if you want more detail by program and by account, that is one of your attachments that you see there, and then you'll have even more detail. So we've given you a high level summary, sort of a condensed summary of by the account. And if you want to know by activity and account, then you would go to your attachment.
And maybe we could point to the attachment that relates to this one department.
Good. I just wanted to be clear. That way it helps you expedite what you're saying to us.
Yeah. So as you are taking this information in and you're studying, if you will, between now and our next workshop on April 12th, you have all that information in front of you. So if you really want to hone in on something specifically, we're happy to address it. But the intent here is to show you a high level where we intend to focus some energies on workshop number 2. If you want us to address any additional items, that feedback today will be helpful. But if not, we're ready and prepared to talk about it on April 12th. So just to share with you, public information education, you also see an increase there. And again, the details sort of share that number there. I will just share with you that there are some additional costs as it relates to conservation outreach, and the advertising, if you will, is included within the public information and education budget. So again, really focusing in on that particular program. Water policy and resource management, you can see is relatively sort of consistent year over year, so that you can see that's there. The next budget you see there is technical planning. You see a larger increase there, about $900,000. We do have some additional sort of efforts, if you will, around sort of our future visioning of West Basin and the efforts associated with that. It includes, as I like to call it, West Basin 3.0. Again, probably a new name could be better to be determined there, but it also includes cost of service and some other costs, if you will, to support the efforts that are usually undertaken by our engineering department, but cannot be capitalized. And so therefore, those costs are included in the technical planning budget. Recycle water operations, you can see a pretty large increase there. Again, the next slide there will show you that is largely having to do with our recycled water chemical costs. And so we can talk about that there. We also have a Title 22 monitoring program. We do have a couple customers that participate in that program. We do get some funding for that program here. And so you can see not a big number overall. And again, the increase year over year is not that much. And then at the bottom of the slide is the overhead program. We do have a number of support services here, often unseen, if you will, but very vital, if you will, to the organization. So that includes our overhead for our administration, our finance and HR. It also includes costs for our building, as well as the costs associated with supporting our board of directors. And you can see overall, year over year, we have a slight decrease, if you will. And then lastly, our labor and benefits, you do see an increase here. I just want to point out that this number here reflects the overall labor and benefits for the district. So from a programmatic standpoint, it's a different number because there are certain costs that are assigned, if you will, to our capital projects. But overall, you can see it going from $9.7 million to $10.9 million. So again, from a programmatic standpoint, you're like, I want to see more on something. We're happy to provide that for you. And what we sort of see, and if I can turn your attention to maybe the next slide, and then I'll maybe open it for some questions after that. So if I look to the next slide here, 31. If I look to the next slide here, you can see sort of what are the big numbers there. So labor and benefits, you can see has increased. And I will just point out the number you see on this page, the number that you see on this page is different than the number on the previous page, because again, this page only references operating programs, and the other page represents all labor for districts. So that includes the cost being assigned to our capital projects. The other big item that you see there is our consultant budget. So we would want to spend some energy on that. I will say largely it has to do with the costs that are being allocated to our water use efficiency program, as well as our technical planning. So we might want to talk about what those costs are associated with that. And then of course you see our chemical budget going from an amended budget of about $17 million to about $19.6 million. And so it's gone up about $2.4 million. So again, going back to the previous slide, $3.2 million increase on recycled water operations, and one line item, most specifically chemicals, is going up $2.4 million. So again, we want to put some, we want to share with you our assumptions around that there. I will share with you that we are about to go out for an RFP for our chemical costs. So hopefully they align to what we budget, and if not, certainly we will come back and have to incorporate, if you will, the costs that are there. And so we can take that into consideration. So again, we wanted just to share with you, both from a programmatic standpoint and account perspective, sort of where the big shifts are. And really, that's where we would want to focus our energy in for next thing. And that's why, going back to the budget driver slide, we think about the prioritization of our technical planning and our CIP is one of those key areas for us to focus in on, because those are where the big dollars are being spent, and we can certainly focus there. But again, if there are other areas that the directors would like us to focus in on a particular line item or a particular program, we're more than happy to do so. But we intend to focus in on labor, consultants, chemical costs, and then as you can see, that is the direct impact, if you will, to our water use efficiency, our technical planning, as well as our recycled water operations. So there. See if there's any other specific questions that I can address.
Any questions, Rick?
Um, Just questions, you don't have to answer them now, if you can come back with the information. On the contract labor, a breakdown of what that consists of. I'm assuming it's both our plants and our service lines, but what the breakdown is.
Correct.
Consultants, a breakdown in who that is.
If I could just clarify, when you say a breakdown by program or
No,
more
by-
specifically,
Like, we've got 10 consultants that make up the $4.4 million. And here's what the consultants are and what they do, and if they're not yet selected, this is what they will be doing.
sure, and I'll just address that it's more like this is what they will be doing as opposed to we have. Yeah,
We have that.
exactly. Okay, got it. All right, we can do that.
Then on the utilities, if we can get a breakdown, most of that I understand is power, but it's not 100% power. A breakdown of that, and then a breakdown by facility. So breakdown in terms of power, gas, etc., and the power at Ed.C. Little, the power at the Torrance Refinery, the power at the Melinda McDonald plant, etc.
Got it.
So a breakdown that way. Chemicals are, we've dealt with that all year. And solids management, you're showing a decrease. Why is that projected to decrease? Facilities maintenance, what constitutes the facilities maintenance? Other operating costs, if you provide a breakdown of what those are. And then project share, I don't understand what that term refers to. So again, a description of what that refers to and what are the individual items that add up to that amount.
Thank you for that feedback, and we will provide you that level of detail. And again, if it's, some of it is more just more informational, this is what it is. And then again, we'll prepare to talk about it, but again, we'll focus in on the more significant sort of changes year over year, so that the board has an understanding. But thank you for that.
Let me ask really fast too, I guess, tying on to that. So where these numbers came from is not in the supplemental slides or the backing document.
So they've been sliced and diced different ways to give you sort of this thing. So this is trying to take all those individual program budgets and then putting them in an account format, because again, I think that understanding sort of where it is, that's there. And so, but again, we've had a program basis, we have it at an account basis, and then at each program, we have it by even the sub-programs by the account. And so we have lots of layers of detail, if you will. And so again, you will have it all in front of you, and it's attached, you know, like I said, for your reference. And if you want to have a specific question for us, and if you want to maybe provide feedback to our board services group, our general manager, before next, before the workshop, and after you look at it here, because I know I'll be looking at it, you might want it too. But if you want to go through and just tell us if there's anything else you want us to be able to address, we're happy to do so. If not, again, the whole team will be available at the next workshop so that they could help me address those questions for you.
Okay, thank you. And just on this too, I would love to know the advertising, what exactly that entails, because you're asking for, it's going to go up like $256,000. But what?
Yeah, and we have some details on that, what the reasons are. So yes.
Let's move to the next one.
All right, so I shared earlier for you, next slide, here is our proposed capital expenditures. Again, we have more details in our supplemental pages. So again, adding now 61 to 65, it shows you the specific line items as it relates to what makes up each of these items here. But for the purposes here, we've shown it at a summary level. Again, $38.8 million on the left side tells you sort of by the different types of project type, if you will. And then on the right side is our intended funding source. So again, just to share with you a couple things there. One is PAYGO. We kind of mentioned that already. So that's the difference between our net our operating revenues minus your operating expenses minus your debt service. That's the balance that's remained. So we, again, assuming that all of that stays the same, our rate assumptions, our sales assumptions, our expenses, $3.2 million we would use, again, invest back in there. I'll skip reserves for just a moment because that becomes sort of the balance, if you will, to see how we do it. The state loan there, we anticipate as we move forward with the Palos Verdes project, that we would have the state loan, that we would say that we would request those funds from the state in order to be able to use that towards the project. And the external funding comes from a variety of sources, including from the refinery agreements. It includes the developers that they would help us for some of those customer development projects. It also includes the money towards the JMM project. So we have our customers that are coming through with some additional support, as well as the Palos Verdes pipeline. We have some state grants, as well as the monies from like the PV golf course and from our customer agency. So again, coming from a variety of sources. So again, we have, you can see there about $12.8 million of external funding that's coming in to reimburse for those costs that we're going to be expending. And again, these are that one-time revenue that for the purposes of calculation for our coverage, we can include it for the purposes there. Again, this is all, per our bond documents, if you will. But again, when we were trying to sort of assess, if you will, what we're trying to do, again, we wanted to sort of take that outside of it to say, if we didn't have the funding, what would it look like for the district here? And then, so once we've determined all those other components, if again, we move forward with all those projects, and that will be a discussion point for next workshop, is what each of those projects are, what are the drivers, why do we need it, how does that help us into what we're doing into the future? And so if we were moving forward with that, the balance of it would come from our reserves. So you can see a pretty sizable draw on our reserves to be able to do that. So it does, have, and so we take that into consideration as well. We do have what we refer to as a designated funds policy, and we have a calculation of what are the amounts that are necessary here. And I will say that this draw will take us down to the minimum that we, or to what that balance calculation is. And so that is something for you to be aware of too, because if we are moving forward those projects and we're paying for it with cash or quote savings, if you will, and that could have an impact for future projects on how we need to do this. I know there has been expressed interest not to issue debt outside of these state loans. But again, if these projects are important to us for us to maintain our service delivery to our customers and to provide that safe and reliable water for our recycled water customers, we will need to have future discussions as it relates to how to fund those projects. And so there are several ways to be able to do it. You can find additional external funding, and you can raise your rates to be able to cover, to drive up your pay-go number in order to do that. Or, maybe you have to issue debt. And those are the kind of conversations that, again, once we have an understanding of where we are with those projects, we can then start to come up with a new answer, if you will, of how we would fund these projects. So that is just to give you a quick overview with it. Again, we do intend to focus in on the projects. But if I turn your attention to the next slide here, I will just focus in on the left bar, if you will, there. So the left bar there is the intended. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes.
Back at page 32. But I understand that the left-hand side of this is basically what you were just jumping to on the next slide. But if you could, I understand the pay-go is basically net revenues, the reserves are the reserves. The state loan, is that 100% the PV project, or is there anything else there?
This is 100% the state loan, because the bulk of the costs for this, the PV lateral is going to be in next year. So for instance, the JMM, the costs are being incurred right now. And so we are starting to make our request into DWR to get the money back to pay, and then we will have a loan going forward. So
This isn't all of the loans that we have. I'm sorry.
correct.
All of the loans that we have. This is just the portion of the state loan that will the PV project next year. And we're gonna ask.
Correct. So, correct. So from an actual standpoint, when I get the loans and when I get the external fundings, is the timing is a little different. So I was trying to match, if I have $38 million in costs, how am I effectively paying for it? And so one of the, since the majority of the PV lateral, for instance, is happening next year, the loan is being reflected as the way and the means in which we're being able to do that. the costs that we've incurred up to date, I is effectively said, we've used reserves for that or current revenues to be able to pay for that.
You referred to the external funding and you kind of gave some examples. Can you provide a detailed breakdown on the external funding, please?
Sure. And again, there's more slides in the back that gives you a little bit of sense of there. But so do you want more? Let me just get that.
I'll be able to say this plus this plus this plus this adds up to $12,840,000.
Yeah. So if you will, and let me just, because I want to make sure I have a clear understanding of when you say the details to it. So if I go to page 62 of your packet. Yes, so it's up on the screen here, but my understanding is 62. Am I right or wrong? I have no idea.
62.
Okay. So yes, if you look here, so you can see, like, for instance, one of the projects is the Park Place extension. So that is going to be 100% funded by a third party. So my question is this sufficient for you, or do you want to know who is that third party external person paying for that? That's what I want to clarify.
I want to know who the third party is so that we understand where the money's actually coming from.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood your request. Okay, thank you.
Wait, hold on there for 1 second, because I literally was gonna ask if there was a backup to see all these numbers, because the new infrastructure, customer level laterals and pipelines is what I was interested in, which it is this page, so.
Correct.
So if we were to go through this, I mean, it doesn't, well, like, for example, Park Place extension. So when we have that number there, is that our contribution to the project?
So that is our cost, but that cost is going to be 100% funded by a third party.
Okay. So they will ultimately pay us back. Is that what you're saying?
That is what this says, yes.
That's the case in all of these projects, right?
Okay. So, the exception is that the effort that we're doing, let's say on the recycled water fill stations, that we're saying that we're coming out of pocket ourselves for that. And then again, the other big number, if you will, is Palos Verdes pipeline, with spending, quote, $13.9 million there. Again, the overall project is something greater than that, but $13.9 million is how much are we getting from our external funding? So again, it's the customers, it's the grants we have, and then it's the state loan that you see there in the middle column. So, and then the balance, if you will, would be coming out of pocket here. And I know there's some additional discussion because I know there's been a request to see if we can get additional funding from our customers. And so that could certainly change that. I know there's going to be more discussion on the Palos Verdes project at the next ENO meeting.
So then, and one last thing, so the Etsy Little Water Recycling Facility fill station, is that the, and the one below other recycled water fill stations, is where people can go?
This has been a request out of the engineering operations effort. And so again, we are moving forward with that effort and we're using our own funds to pay for that. So.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you. Are there any other questions at this time, Director Alvarez? Okay.
All right, so let's go back to the next slide, please, which is 33. Thank you so much. So this here is, again, to provide you a 5-year forecast of what our CIP looks like. Again, we can take the discussion next workshop on April 12th, to go into these various projects. But you can see that we started to try to color code them. We have essentially 5 big projects that we're looking to move forward with it. And then we've have our what we refer to as our capital asset rehabilitation and replacement. That's that green bar. Effectively, what that means is mostly that it's membranes that we're doing. It's some other little efforts that's there. And while we are trying to pay for it with current revenues, if you will, if we are short in our current revenues to pay for that, we'll come out of reserves for it, because these are ones in which we want to, these have shorter life expectancy. But from a capitalization standpoint, I can capitalize those costs from an accounting standpoint. And so I'm trying to use, quote, current dollars or reserves to pay for them, but but they can be considered a capital cost for the purposes of accounting. So the accountants love to do things. So anyways, that being said, you can see the other big projects there is the solids handling and the filters project. And then there's just a number of other projects there. Again, those other projects, again, they're all laid out in those detail sheets that you see. And again, on your supplemental pages. So, and then again, we can focus in on the projects themselves. And again, the next year's is, you know, there you can see there's some carryover of some projects like some of the bigger ones that we're starting this year or intend to start this year with the board's direction. And then you can see what the impact is for next year. And then what it looks like over the next few years. And so again, when we take a long-term view of what it means for us, that this is certainly telling you what we have. And again, if the discussion is, how are we going to pay for that? Are we going to use our own district funding, i.e. are we going to use our own PAYGO to pay for it? Are we going to continue to draw on reserves? Are we going to go out and issue debt or use our commercial paper? Those are all those discussions that, again, we will want to have with you to make sure we understand, because one way or the other, these projects are important for us to move forward and to continue to deliver to our customers. It is important that we then make sure we understand how to fund them as well. So this is that long-term view as well.
Good.
I think Mark would like to add.
I may add, the detail sheets that start on packet page 81. So there's a sheet for every single project that we are proposing for next year. And on there, you'll see a project description, purpose of the project, the benefit that it could provide, the drivers for the project, how it meets some of our strategic goals. It also has a anticipated schedule, what end user customers would they impact. So quite a bit of information in there. And it also has some of the milestones of where the board would weigh in. We'll see updated costs, updated scopes, and weigh in on whether it should proceed or not.
And just, there's a lot of pages here, so approximately how many projects are there? Does anybody have a ballpark number? Just out of curiosity.
I think it's between 30 to 43 projects.
Okay.
It's 43 line items. Some of them are line items for replacement of membranes. They're not exact capital projects, but capital expenditure.
Thank you very much for that.
Being mindful of time, it's about 6 o'clock right now. I do have 3 quick little sections that I can go through. I don't know if you want to spend maybe another 5-10 minutes with me, or we can carry this.
Okay, but, well, hold on. I see Greg, but I see Director Alvarez. Did you have something at this moment or not?
Which ones are you gonna cover?
So just real briefly, the 5-year forecast that starts on page 35, really is just to, again, try to provide you what that forecast looks like there. Again, there are certain assumptions there. By no means is this sort of the final numbers, but again, I wanted just to kind of show what it is. You will see that the next 2 years are a little bit tough, if you will, but going into the following years, they do start to increase. One of the reasons is that our standby charge, for whatever reason on the settlement, we go back up. So it has an impact there. So that's financial forecast. The next section there, just to focus in.
Slow down for 1 second.
I'm sorry.
First of all, I'm going to ask Director Alvarez, then I did see Greg at the hand. But Director Alvarez, go ahead with what your question was, please.
This overall budget summary for the 5-year projection. My question is, what is the basis assumptions behind the reserve increases shown for the period 23-24 through 27-28?
Yes. So
And my other question is, on the revenue side, what is the basis for the revenue projection? And specifically, the breakdown between imported water sales and the whatever our rate, assumed rate is. So I want to understand what we're projecting our future rate increases to be. As well as I'm assuming that those revenues, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that is a wrong assumption, include recycled water sale revenues.
yes. If I could turn, I'm sorry you have more questions.
So a breakdown of those.
If you would turn to the next slide, if you will, it does give you some of that breakdown that you're requesting. So it does provide you imported water sales, recycled water sales, what our standby charge looks like. fixed payment starts, all that other components there. So it does give you some consideration there. I will just note, if you are looking and wondering, why is projected imported water sales dropping in fiscal year 25-26? This is when we assume Dominguez Gap drops off for us as an agency. We are no longer serving imported water because the project is up and running with WRD in City of Los Angeles. If that changes, that could certainly change the numbers there. The following slide then to provide you some additional details as it relates to the expenses. And again, what I heard you say is, again, a little bit more details about the assumed rate. We did assume in future rate increases of 5% on our reliability service charge, passing through Metropolitan Water increases, and no additional debt outside of our state loans. So that is the assumptions that are there. And that helps you, give you some context, but we can go into a little bit more detail. I believe that answers some of your questions, not all of it. So
We'll be able to get back to the rest of it.
I got a question on that slide. Greg, you had something to add?
I was just going to add that, on the forecast, what we do not have in here is a picture of what may be required in the way of investments for the future of our water recycling program. We've talked about the technical planning and, the cost increases there. And predominantly our efforts are focused on evaluating options and feasibility of what that future of our program may look like. And so as we do that work, then we'll be able to bring back to the board the scope of that future program, the cost estimates, presumably the partnerships that'll support that. And so we'll be able to begin to envision what those costs look like in those outer years.
Very good. Okay, I had a question on the slide that you're on now, which is our page 36. That's still up here, right? So I know what you say about was it the Dominguez Gap? Is that what you mentioned?
Mhm.
But yet after that, we have imported water sales spiking back up for the next 2 years, and this is way down the road in the future. So why is that?
again, there's an assumption on water sales on that in there. And again, we can provide you the underlying assumptions around what those rates are and what the acre feet are.
You got something?
No, that was why I had asked that question earlier.
Yeah, I'll look, you have it in the backup somewhere, you said, or you?
We did not provide you that level, but we do have that and we can certainly continue to provide that to you.
I just don't, I don't understand that one, quite honestly. I mean, we're already imported water sales right now, 3169, then 171, then it goes down, but then you're really pushing it up, and then you're pushing it up even higher in the future, which,
Again, it's those MET increases.
well, but, okay, so this is just financials. This is not volume, well, or you're taking the volume and.
There's volume
Right.
and rates that
That's what
make
you're
that
trying to.
number. And we'll give you more information on that.
Okay, wonderful. And then the one prior to that, on so page 35 of our packets, I think it's the slide right before that. When you do have your revenues, the projections coming in, and this accounts for the parcel tax diminishing and then going away, right?
Standby charge.
Yeah,
And I will say that the standby charge, so you're seeing this uptick, if you will, in the last 3 years. Keep in mind that the standby charge does end, if you will, in 2030.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, you are going to see then a drop in revenue, but we also see a drop in our debt service. So that we can certainly share with you as well. Maybe we should just show you out to, I'll say, post standby charge so that you understand what that impact could be. And I'm happy to provide that for you.
Volunteer to do a 10-year budget?
We do have that actually. It just how much we want to share on the slide, but and I will say, I mean, some of the assumptions, we've made, but I will just say some of the assumptions you make around recycled water costs, like we might miss it just because we can't predict some of those cost increases we've seen. So we do our best I can.
all right, thank you. Now, sorry,
That's pretty good.
Where-
Systems are hard to predict.
where are we at? Maybe we're back to what page are we on? Because I know we skipped around.
37.
And I don't necessarily need to go in detail on the sensitivity analysis. Certainly you can look at that and we can certainly bring it back next month. But what I wanted just to share with you is we've made certain assumptions about water sales, about rates, about what is our investment within, PAYGO net revenues that would use towards PAYGO. And so if we go to a few more slides, I'm sorry, one more slide. So here's if we were to adjust retail potable sales. Again, this is only making an assumption on the first year, not necessarily on the out years. If we made a change of, what if we had more sales in fiscal year 23, 24? How would that start to change the outlook for us in fiscal year 23, 24? And then you can see sort of, we just kept all the other factors the same. How would it look like going out there? And you can see it actually improves it a little bit, doesn't improve it a lot. And so the question is is that one of those things there? Is 95 the right number, and whatever it is. So if there's I'll say a perfect scenario of what the sales should be, what the rates want to be, what your investment from PAYGO should be. If you have that feedback for us, we're happy to run sort of a thing here. We try to sort of isolate, if you will, on this slide here, retail potable sales, again, 2% less, 2% lower, just again, to give you some sensitivity. And if there are other ones out there, happy to run them. Next slide really focuses in on if we were to adjust our reliability service charge. We're like, you know what? 10%, Margaret, I can't do it. What if I did 0? Oh my gosh, 0 would put us way below, our legal debt covenant. Now, again, keep in mind that there is that other sort of one-time revenues I can account for. So maybe that's okay. But it is, it doesn't sort of solve the problem for future years. And so that's something to consider. And you're like, you know what, Margaret, I really want to have more money to pay for PAYGO or something like that. And so, again, if I want to do a 15% increase, what does that look like both from a coverage and a PAYGO perspective? So again, we can move the dial on that one as well. The third scenario that I shared with you here, and again, I know this is just for display purposes only. I know it's not something you would ever do, but I wanted just to share with you. Again, if you are really saying, I want to pay for PAYGO projects. I 100% support those PAYGO projects that are out there, or I should say our capital projects that are out there. The next slide there that you see, next slide that you see there. I understand that this is like way out of there, and again, if we really said, I need to get $10 million of PAYGO funding, what does that mean? And again, I assumed it only in the first year and nothing in the out years as far as big increases. You would have to do a really sizable increase in this initial year. Now, you can smooth that out over a period of time. But for instance, if you wanted to get $10 million in that first year for PAYGO, and you wanted to get it in that first year, you can get there, but you would have to do a 35% increase. Now, you weren't happy with my 10, you're certainly not going to be happy with the 35, but that just tells you that that is something that needs to drive it. So part of it is you from the policy leaders here is what drives the budget. Is our sales going to drive our budget? Is our rates going to drive our budget? Is our PAYGO going to drive our budget? Maybe it's coverage that drives the budget. Any of those things that are there. Other things are sort of ancillary, like staffing levels are ancillary, consultants. Yes, that helps it, but it doesn't drive the budget. These are the factors that drive the budget. And that's what these slides are trying to share with you, just to give you sort of context. Because again, this scenario here absolutely makes you look wonderful and it gets you there. But is that something that we want to do? Most likely not. And so again, and maybe it is, but maybe it's a slow ramp up in order to get there. And so that's the purpose of these slides. Again, I went through it quickly, but I know we're after time. And so I wanted just to maybe just highlight that for you. And we're happy to, take your feedback. Maybe we go through the details there. We take that information on workshop number 2, and then workshop number 3, we can really come back with, show me this, show me that, and we can certainly do that. So if that being said, I can go to the last section, which is sort of next steps and what we have done here to talk about that. So we do have our scheduled workshops here. We do are planning to have our next workshop on really going through those revenues and expense details in a little bit more detail on April 12th. We have a schedule for the afternoon again. We have our customer agency workshop on May 12th. I'm sorry, 2nd. Our final review on May 3rd with the intended purpose that's to adopt our budget and our water rates and charges on May 22nd. Again, at any time.
Of course, we'll have the F&A in between there, right?
Right, and we will. And so, but at any time, if you're like, I need more time, I need another workshop, we as staff are ready to provide that to you. This is giving us the opportunity. Again, we want to make sure that we're giving you the information you need to make as decision makers to adopt that water rates and charges, to adopt that budget. Because at the end of the day, we are here to serve our community, to serve our customers, to serve our constituents. And we want to make sure that we are, getting the information to you so that you can make those decisions. With that, I'll take you to the next slide, which is just really to focus in on, and the purpose of our next workshop is to focus on those key areas. We have staffing needs that we wanted to talk about, technical planning, capital program. We heard, provided some additional details. We got some action items from you. We were going to show it up on screen, but I think in the interest of time, I won't do that. We will also go through our department programs, priorities and other district priorities and share that with you because again, we have some other things that we wanted just to share with you so that you're aware. We may not go necessarily through the numbers, but so that you understand some of the, efforts that we have planned there. And then if I go to one more slide, which is focusing in on our customer and public engagement, it was very important for our board to make sure that we were communicating to our customers, to our public. And as a result of that, we have done a number of things already. So if you go to our website on the homepage, you will see a click here to get to our dedicated page for our budget. And as these things are happening, we will then post, if you will, the presentation as well as the recording so that anyone who was unable to attend will have that information available to them. We have also done other sort of announcements and sent a letter to all of our customer agencies, to our elected officials and city managers at the request of the directors. We've been engaged with the West Basin Water Association by providing some additional monthly information on their report. We've done a social media post. I remember seeing it one day and I was like, oh, cool, I see it. So again, social media is out there. We also actually just today, South Bay COG came out with their monthly newsletter. Our information was shared in that information as well. And we will continue to promote on with West Basin Water Association with the social media. And as I mentioned, we will have a customer agency workshop and we will make a concerted effort to invite all of them. Like I did last year, I will personally outreach to each one of them to make sure that they are aware of it and so that they have an opportunity to participate in the process. All along, again, we've been giving them all the dates so that they can participate at any time, but this is the dedicated time for them. And that takes me to the end at 6:14. So.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Margaret. Really, any last questions from the board members or comments?
Great job.
Quite a meeting, quite a meeting. All right, so thank you so much for that, Margaret, and you're getting us the information that we asked for. Let me move into next part of our agenda here. So with that, are there any director comments or future agenda items?
Thank you.
Okay, I don't have anything to add either, except same thing. We a very good meeting, of course, but much more in-depth information. I think it was a good way to start this process for us to help digest it. And so thank you, staff, for that. Our next scheduled regular meeting is to be held April 24th, 2023. And with that, we are adjourned.